This episode of What's the Story podcast is brought to you by Manscaped. We've got some good news, lads. Manscaped has a new product alert. The Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer is out now. It's available worldwide. Mero and I have been fortunate enough to be given one of these to test drive. Lads, the results have been amazing. If you're a long time listener to this podcast, long before Manscaped came into our lives, you will have heard us talking about the struggle of keeping your nose hair under control. No idea why, but you hit around 30 and for some reason your nasal hair just explodes, man. Just the growth explodes with no warning. And I'd say over the years I've tried maybe 5, 6, possibly even 7 or 8 different nasal hair trimmers, and they've left you with that feeling of like, it'll do. When you want to look your best and you want to feel your best, it'll do, will never do. So thanks to Manscaped and the Weed Whacker, that problem is solved. Mero took to waxing his nose. That's how bad it got for him. There's photographic evidence. The results are horrific. Even worse than all of that, have you ever plucked a nose hair? You ever just been sitting there, just breathing? You can just feel one. You can't help yourself. So you kind of get your thumb and your index finger, little pincer movement, and you rip one out of your nostril. Your partner sitting on the other end of the sofa looking at you in disbelief. Your eyes are watering for about 15 hours, but they're grilling you. Did you actually just rip out a nose hair in the living room, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, while we're watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer reruns? What are you, a sick animal? Lads, those days are gone. You'll be clean, you'll be comfortable, you'll be happy. All you got to do is head over to manscaped.com, pop in the code WTSPod, you'll get 20% off and free shipping. And the great news with all of this, the skin-safe technology that's in Manscaped's Lawnmower 3.0, that's also in the Weed Whacker. So you'll be looking just as good above the waist as you do below the waist. There'll be no nicks, no tugs, no scratches. Everything is clean, comfortable and great. Thanks to Manscaped, we've got you sorted. Head on over today, manscaped.com, 20% off and free shipping. All you got to do is put in WTS pod. What are you waiting for? Go whack those weeds. Hello everybody and welcome to What's the Story podcast. This is episode 223 and it's the first in the year of our Lord 2021. Graham Mero Merrigan, how are you?
Good, how are you? And it's great to start the new year with one of our bestest friends.
Indeed.
Someone that we would talk to every week if we could. Someone that when we talk to them, the hour is never enough. This man is just the best social historian in Ireland.
Starting the new year by looking back.
And one of the best podcasters in Ireland now as well. He also has his weekly slot on News Talk with Gavin Riley, Hidden Histories. The incomparable Donal Fallon. Thank you for joining us in our new episode of 2021. How are you?
That's a great introduction. I take that every day of the week. Thank you.
He's also a St. Patrick's Athletic fan and a Dublin GAA fan, but we won't hold that against him.
Do you have the deep Shamrock Rovers distaste for the Dublin GAA setup still?
This is a great question. When I overthink it and think about it, I have a terrible disdain towards it. And it's like, if you go to, there's a lot of Shamrock Rovers fans that are still rabid Dublin GAA fans. But at the end of the day, when you think about it, Thomas Davis GAA did try to end the club. And it's something that I don't think about often, but when I do think about it, I get a bit angry about it. But I would never I wouldn't judge any of our fans that still go to the GAA, like. What do you think about it, Donald? Like, if you were covering it, you haven't covered it just yet, I don't think, in your Three Castles Burning podcast. But how do you, on reflection, how do you think Shamrock Rovers fans should treat GAA?
I'm working on an edition. I've been working on it for a long time, to be honest, on Keep Rovers at Milltown. I've done a lot of digging into the kind of the archives of the fanzines. Brilliant. Rovers had a great culture of fanzines going right back, probably more than any other club in the league. And great names, by the way. One of the Rovers fanzines was called Some Ecstasy. I think the joke was that you could stand on the terrace and say, anyone want some ecstasy? The guards come running over and it's just the guy selling the fanzine. But it always struck me as a club that was very, and you get this when you talk to people who know a lot about Rovers history, people like Jason Maloney and other people, that Rovers was always, it was intergenerational. Do you know what I mean? Like it was, even though the club has moved literally all over the city, it's just in people's blood. And I could understand when something means that much to you, why you wouldn't quickly forgive something like the Thomas Davis fiasco. But yeah, I mean, forget Keep Rovers and Milton. It'd be a great episode even in the never-ending tug of war around Tala and the road to that stadium. It's an extraordinary story.
For people,
but I think it's funny when you're on the hill, like watching the Dubs, because the League of Ireland is so small, and it is very small. I mean, it's like a subculture, you know. It's like saying you were a punk in London in the 60s, saying you like the League of Ireland. People are going to look at you for that. When you're on the hill, you do recognise people from all the various clubs that you know from social media or whatever else. And Rovers are more absent, we shall say.
For people who are ignorant, like myself, to the Thomas Davis fiasco, lads, what is it?
Well, Thomas Davis tried to put an injunction on Tala Stadium in South Dublin County Council. They didn't want it to be there, and they didn't want Rovers to be the tenants. So Rovers had to take them to the Supreme Court, and it was a long fight and a long battle. And Rovers fans had to fund it themselves. So as the 400 Club came out of that as well, did it?
Yeah, there's really remarkable pictures of Tala Stadium when it's like half built and like it's just out of control. It looks like Caseman Park in Belfast, you know, which has kind of been allowed to kind of fall apart over time. And it's like some of the work was done, a lot wasn't, and people wondered would it ever be completed. Like it was just an extraordinary time. And you walk through that stadium now, and I've been to see the Irish women's team tend to use Tala. And it's a top-class stadium, but when you look at the pictures of it in the middle of the dispute, like, oh my God, it's hard to believe it's the same place.
Yeah. And it's the Shamrock Rovers fan podcast, Tales from the East End. They did a great historical feature way back with two of the main fans that were involved in the court case and stuff like that. And it is a great listen to, and it's a great history lesson to newer Shamrock Rovers fans who became Shamrock Rovers fans from the Tala days up. They'll know the fight that it took to get a home and to be tenants of South Dublin County Council. But you mentioned Jason Maloney there. I do know Jason was a Dublin fan prior to all that. And I don't think he could stomach going back. But also a shout out to Big Al Murray as well, Donal, who I know is a friend of yours, who is the best badge maker in the land. Thanks, Big Al.
It's an interesting one, I think, in general, the history of football or the history of, you know, like the League of Ireland itself. There's so many stories around it, and in fairness, as much as I try to wind Mero up over Rovers, and I don't have the intelligence nor the knowledge to be able to do it properly. But, the history around the Dublin clubs alone, there's a podcast series in that, like.
Yeah, the last thing I published, it was kind of weird writing it all in lockdown, because you know, people always talk about, you're more productive in lockdown and all this stuff. I think most people are, actually. I think most people, the days all kind of blend into one, you know, when you're watching Tiger King or whatever is trending. It's very hard to kind of motivate yourself to do a great deal, you know. But the last thing I wrote was an article on soccer in the suburbs for Pogue McGoal, which is a really cool kind of independent football magazine. And it's amazing how GAA never really got its grip on the kind of new Dublin suburbia, even like the 30s, Crumlin, Cabra, the 50s a little bit further out, and even up to like, you know, the 70s, things started to change because the team were doing well on the pitch, Heffo's Army and stuff. But it's amazing how long it took for the GAA to really get into suburban Dublin, and like soccer was always the game of the suburbs. I find that really, really interesting.
Well, that's I never took to GAA as a young lad, because like growing up in Ballybrack, the nearest GAA club, and I'm probably wrong on this, Coola, was it?
Yeah, Coola, yeah.
And I always presumed as a young lad from Ballybrack that Coola was full of poshies because it was in Dalkey. So I'd no interest at all.
was like, no, that's not for me now. I don't want that to do with that.
Roy Curtis, who I had on Three Castles Burning not too long ago, great sports writer, great pipe man as well. Roy lives in Terranure, and he was kind of making the point that the GAA boat codes, hurling was always kind of going that way, but football too, that boat codes are kind of more middle class now than they would have been historically. That it's a game that's making its way into those communities too. But I mean, the soccer thing fascinates me because I suppose it's the most egalitarian of games in the world. All you need is 4 jumpers and a ball, you know. And
jumpers for goalposts. Shout out to Keith Kelly.
It's all in the name. Jumpers for goalposts is such a brilliant name.
Yeah.
It's all in the name, isn't it? That it didn't take a great deal to start playing soccer, and that's why soccer came to dominate.
Was GAA always? Was it ever working class, Donal?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the thing about GAA was that it was all encompassing, if you know what I mean. Like it was a game for all. But hurling, like one of the podcasts that I've half written and I keep going back to and stopping and starting the history of hurling in Dublin. Like only one native born Dub has ever won an All Ireland hurling medal. A guy called Jim Byrne. He won it in 1938. They were the last Dublin team to win a hurling All Ireland, which is mad.
Jesus.
Like people talk about Dublin dominate Gaelic football because of sheer population. But I think the failure in hurling, failure is a bit of a harsh word. There's been some great successes, but not an All-Ireland win. But I think that shows that numbers don't just mean success. Like Dublin just can't do it really in hurling in the same way. And this guy, Jim Byrne, 1938, every other player on the team who won a medal was basically from the country and lived in Dublin. So like guards, civil servants, school teachers. And like it was a countryman's game. It was a culture game, as they'd say. And the Dubs just never really made their impact in hurling. But I think that's changing now. And you're seeing that across the city. The clubs some of them are really pushing hurling and specialising in hurling, but maybe someday we'll win a hurling All-Ireland. Who knows? But it really annoys me, this stuff about splitting the county in football, because like, you know, all things end. You know, no one said split Kerry in 2 when they won 4 in a row in the 70s. You know, all things come to an end.
To kind of change pace a little bit, but maybe stay in key with the GAA situation there. A couple of months back, there was an unbelievable podcast, The Bloodied Field. How much of the centenary did you? I imagine you paid attention to pretty much every bit of it, did you?
Michael Foley did that book. Yeah, I mean it was the decade of centenaries totally came off the tracks, didn't it? And the tragedy was Dublin was the beginning of the decade of centenaries. We had the lockout to 2013 was a big Dublin year, and that was a great year. I remember going around all these schools in like East Wall and Ringsend with the late Ger O'Leary, great character, the actor who died a few years ago. Brilliant actor, by the way. He was in everything. He was in Michael Collins. He was in every film by that director, what's that great director, Sheridan. So he got him a role in everything. He's actually in the 50 Cent biopic, Get Rich or Die Trying.
Is he?
Yeah, is he?
He's a great Dublin actor. But the best role Ger ever played was Jim Larkin. He was a really good, entertaining Jim Larkin. And in 2013, we went around all the schools, and I do a talk, and the kids weren't all that interested. And then Ger would get up and do the great, only a pig, great because we're on our knees, and they'd all cheer with him. It was great. So Dublin was the beginning of the decade of centenaries. We had the lockout, and it came thick and heavy. And then we had the Rising was basically a Dublin event with a little bit of fighting outside. But there was a real energy in Dublin in 2016, which was great. And then the focus went to the countryside because, you know, the War of Independence was different in the sense that most of it happened in the countryside. But last year, the focus was really meant to come back to Dublin. And there were so many things. Kevin Barry, the burning of Balbriggan, Bloody Sunday. Like there's just loads of big events that were centred on Dublin once again. And I was really excited for marking all of them. But it just came undone, didn't it? And then the GAA, in fairness to them, like they really did the best they could in the circumstances. You know, I thought the ceremony in Croke Park was amazing.
It's brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant, to be fair to him.
Cluxton laying the wreath and the kind of eternal flames on the hill. And then, like, whoever picked Gleeson, like, brilliant choice of voice to read the names and the bios. It was really moving. It was probably more moving because Croke Park was empty.
Yeah.
Strange as that sounds. There was a kind of real emotional power in the empty stadium that day. But that centenary went really well in its own strange way. You know, they managed to do as much as they could. And Foley's book is great. It made a really good podcast. It was kind of the year of big produced podcasts, because like you lads, my podcast is not exactly I've seen your setup, and your setup makes me look like, you know, some pirate radio station. all I have is, all I have is a little Zoom recorder that sits on the kitchen table. But I thought the Bloodied Field, the Foley podcast, was so brilliantly produced. It was clearly one of the big events, if you will, from the GAA's point of view of the centenary. They did a great job on producing that. And there were other podcasts last year, like the Nobody Zone. It was really the year of just. It really felt like the year that actually podcasts kind of knocked telly a little bit, didn't it?
I think with people in lockdown as well,
that's very fair to say.
They had kind of, well, everybody had more time in their hands, but everybody felt they'd probably a little bit more time to explore things. Get to that list. It's on my list. The great meaning to be meant to listen to that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the thing about making telly is that it's very difficult to make TV because there's so many people involved. There's the guy who does the sound, or the girl who does the sound. There's the camera person. There's a lot of stuff going on that, like, in social distancing is a nightmare. It's just really, really hard. And so there was almost nothing made last year.
Yeah.
And anything that was made wasn't great. It was kind of low budget. But I think there was a real shift in media towards podcasts. They blew up because everyone was working from home and they're just that bit easier to produce. So, yeah, last year was kind of the year that the Irish podcast arrived, about 5 years later than everywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. That's what we keep saying to Merrow. We were about 5 years too early.
Yeah. Well, everyone and their dog has a podcast in New York or in London, Yeah.
The problem is my dogs have a podcast and it gets more listeners than this one, but they're doing great. Fair play to them. You mentioned you mentioned the centenary of Kevin Barry there as well, and that was a weird one. Like so many people, I done my Leaving Cert history project on Kevin Barry, but the centenary nearly passed me by. It was literally on the day, and it was only I started to see like a load of tweets in my newsfeed, and I was like, Jesus, that's 100 years today. Like, it was a weird one. It just, yeah,
it was strange because he's such a kind of classic iconography, like a classic image of the revolutionary period. A great picture of Barry in his Belvedere college jersey.
Yeah.
Is that the only picture we have, though?
There's loads of pictures of Barry, but that's the iconic one. And I remember a couple of years ago, a street artist called Canvas, a really talented street artist, or street artists, I should say, kind of like a street art collective. They pasted that up in town on a wall on Marlborough Street, not far from Belvedere. Yeah. It's actually still there. I mean, it was just a wheat paste on a wall it's like 5 years ago, and it's still there, which I find amazing. People just love it so much, they've left it be, and it's just weathering over time. But I thought like the ballad of Kevin Barry, so iconic, was sung by Paul Robeson, Leonard Cohen. He's such a symbol that I thought that would have been a much bigger centenary than it turned out to be, which was strange. Bloody Sunday was so massive, I think, because you had an organisation in every community like the GAA. Like the GAA exists everywhere. Every village in the country has a GAA presence in it. And they really decided that they were going to go hell for leather in marking it, even within the restriction, and they did. But I think the state stuff, like the burning of Balbriggan, the hanging of Kevin Barry, all that was pretty lackluster in the end. But what do you do in a pandemic? It's very hard to know. I wanted to go down to Cork for the 100th anniversary of the Kilmichael ambush, which was a major moment in the war. 28th of November, so a week after Bloody Sunday. An ex-British Army soldier, Tom Barry, leader of a flying column in Cork, inflicts massive casualties on the British at a place called Kilmichael. And I wanted to go down. I wanted to be there 100 years to the day after it happened, but it just couldn't be done, So maybe the 101st anniversaries next year will be, the COVID centenaries. They might be big.
It's have you ever gone into Belvedere, Donal, to look through their Kevin Barry archive?
No, but they've got a plaque of him, and they've got a tournament named in his honour every year. Which I like. So he kind of lives on there, which is nice.
I can't remember he's probably long since retired because he was kind of old now when I was doing the Leaving Cert project. I remember I got to go into Belvedere, into that archive room, and this guy showed me around, and they have like dance cards, and they have all these things to like his teenage years in school, and letters that he would have wrote back home to I think it's Hackettstown in Carlow, was it?
Yeah.
Like, but just incredible stuff, and I'm kind of like, why is this just fucking lying in a dark room in Belvedere?
Yeah, he was born in Dublin, but the family were Carlow, so it's kind of between the two. But what I like about his letters is that he was he was a young lad, but he wasn't that young. Like he wasn't much younger than most of the people would have been around him in those kind of spheres of life. But there's a real humour in his letters it's like the humour for young lads. So like he sometimes signs his letters. yours till hell freezes over, and another one is yours till I graduate. You know, this kind of stuff. And one of his last letters, he kind of alludes to the girls in UCD, which I thought was quite nice. You know.
Yeah,
say hello to the girls from me. So he was just like, he went to dances, he chased young ones, you know, he had a laugh, he was a full human. And one of his relatives, one called Schiffer O'Donovan, wrote a biography of him last year called Yours Till Hell Freezes. It was really nice to just read about someone that is almost this kind of saint-like martyr, but you know, to read the human side of them, and that they were a bit of crack and had their problems and worries, as we all do. It really humanized them. But yeah, that's the only place that anything really happened with Barry. There's like 5 books written about him. I think the people envisioned a much bigger centenary than we got in the end.
You mentioned UCD there. I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with it, but just a sad story that came out this week. Old man Belfield, Mick Bourne, he was a famous homeless man who thousands for the last 30-40 years or more maybe, he was a very familiar and a very fond sight to everyone who passed through Belfield at some stage or another, and he passed away this week. Donal, do you know anything about him, or do you have any stories about him?
UCD amazes me because I spent like years of my life in UCD and as a student, and then occasionally teaching there a little bit. And I still don't think I've seen half that campus. It's so enormous in scale. And one of the recent podcasts I did was about the student movement in the 60s all over the world, you know, how it blew up in Paris and in America and the southern states, and talked a little bit about UCD and Trinity. And there was a big controversy back then about moving the college out to Belfield. You know, a lot of the students felt it would be the downfall of the place, that they were moving too far from the city. And the Catholic clergy were very much in favour of it because they wanted to get them away from Trinity. They said that it was a sphere of Protestant influence to take the poor old UCD students and move them somewhere safe like Dublin 4 suburbia. But you can spend 4 or 5 years of your life in UCD and not see half of it and not know what people are referencing.
I spent 4 years there, never once set foot in the Ag Science building, never once set foot, you know what I mean?
And there's great stuff, like there's a staff bar in the arts block, which I was brought into a few times, which is an amazing place, and like people don't know it's there. But it's
the upstairs in the arts block. The upstairs in the art block is like a different universe. Like when you start going into some of them and the little museums and that kind of thing that they have, it's another world. Like,
yeah, it never ends, you know. And there's all kinds of great mythology around UCD, like mad urban myths. So in the 60s, when it was kicking off with the students in Aylesford Terrace, in the old UCD, what's now the concert hall, they occupied a big part of the building, and when it was called the Gentle Revolution. And there's an urban myth that they built Belfield with a lake so that the students couldn't have a central meeting point to stop them kind of taking over the college. But apparently that's not true. Apparently there's other reasons they built the lake. But you know, students in UCD tell themselves all these things. They talk about the tunnels underneath the buildings, and they say they're so the lecturers can escape if the students take over the campus. But it's all this stuff that just passes on from generation to generation and becomes believed fact, even if it isn't. But I just, the scale of use, and some of the buildings are so they're real like 1960s brutalist stuff, good and bad. And then you can walk 5 minutes and see something like that looks beautifully old. There's just so much diversity in the campus, but you'll never explore it all. Trinity is very different in the sense that Trinity was never meant to be a college for everyone. You know, it was intended as a very elitist college. You had to be, for the first 200 years, Protestant landowning. They never envisioned themselves as a place open to all. So it's a much smaller campus, I think, as a result of that. Like a lot of Trinity now is kind of growing outside the walls of Trinity, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Like over the Starbucks on College Green, there's Trinity College offices. Like Trinity's everywhere now. Trinity's just taken over the city. But it's much more confined to a historic, smaller campus that you can walk around easier than Belfield, you know. You'll never explore all of Belfield. But I knew him to see, and there are other characters like him too. People who, I think in some cases had gone to UCD and just never left, and you know, were to be found sitting in the library, and you wondered how they got there. The people who just knew it as a place of warmth, and you know, it was unlike the city centre, somewhere where you'd largely be left alone. And I think that the students kind of took him to their hearts and looked after him a little bit, which is really nice.
So old man Belfield, did he had a sleeping bag on the grounds of UCD, and how long has he been there?
People talk about seeing him on campus like 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You're joking me.
It's remarkable, yeah. So a real part of the kind of the identity of the place after that kind of time, you know.
Yeah,
But it's mad, and even I'm sure you know yourself, like from League of Ireland, like people go out there to watch their teams play against UCD and still get lost.
Yeah.
the twice a year trip to watch your club play UCD, and you just see fans of the team all over the campus looking for a football pitch, even if they've been there like 50, 60 times before. It's just mad, isn't it?
It's a labyrinth at times, and I think Michael, and again, like I genuinely I didn't know his name up until the news when passing away came out. Like that was just, you know, Old Man Belfield or the homeless chap in UCD kind of. And
well, you know, in Trinity they call it Stillorgan IT. They say it's not a university.
That's true.
Oh my God!
I don't think there's any justification for having two universities of that scale, because they're just competing all the time for funding and for influence. And you know, if it wasn't for the bizarre nature of Irish history, that one was once Catholic and one was Protestant, they wouldn't exist as two separate institutions. And you know, if there's peace now in the valley between the two, you know, it's been that way since the 70s. The Catholic ban on Trinity has gone since the 70s. We could have a world-class university structure if we just put the two of them together. But that'll never happen.
Yeah.
But in terms of Old Man Belfield, like, did he? Where was his sanctuary?
That's a great question. I mean, people from the area around, the villages around the college knew him to see too. Like, he kind of wandered around that broader kind of Victorian red brick area around UCD as well as the college campus. But yeah, it's mad. There's people like that, like in Dublin City, who you see. You go into town, like at the moment, actually, you go into town and they're the only people you see.
Yeah. Because
the absence of tourists. Like College Green is mad. It's so eerie how empty it is. And you realise that at the height of summer, the population of Dublin City doubles, if not trebles, with visitors from abroad. So the only people that you see now in the city are kind of homeless faces that you'd recognise. Depending on what day, what time you're in, wandering around. It's very eerie, very strange.
And it is. I think it's, and like the thing that strikes me about it, just like in terms of one of my enduring memories in my time in UCD, is Old Man Belfield. And like you were kind of saying earlier, Don, like he was this enduring side, but never spoke a word to him. And I remember a couple of times I would have got a cup of tea and just kind of handed it to him, just, you know, feeling sorry for him, just, Jesus, look, it's a cold day or whatever. You'd always stand outside. Do you remember where the 911 and the student union shop under the library was?
Yeah.
See him around that kind of area, and you'd be happy as Larry with a smoke and like that. If someone gave him a cup of tea or whatever, I don't think I ever heard him say the word thanks, but there was this kind of nod of acknowledgement that he'd give you, and it set you up for the day. You know, it was kind of like, grand, now that's it. And he was this to so many students. He was this kind of, there was a respect there, like, and like UCD isn't exactly a bastion of, you know, the great and good at times. There's an awful lot of arseholes that have gone through the campus, you know. But
it's very anonymous. It's a very anonymous place too, because of how big it is.
Exactly, you get lost in the numbers.
Especially if you're a Dubliner, it's particularly anonymous because, you know, if you go to college in Dublin and you're from Dublin, you don't move out. You generally stay at home. So you don't have the same connection to a place as, you know, these like hordes of kids from rural Ireland who are all living on campus and kind of know each other a bit better. So I found that in UCD, that I just got the bus to UCD and got the bus home generally when I was done. So I didn't have the same sense of connection with the place that they might have had. I wasn't in any societies. Again, if you're going to college in your own county, you don't tend to join societies and stuff like that. So you never felt part of the college. And he was one of the few kind of constants that you'd see all the time. And buying him a cup of tea and the like here and there. But I mean, Trinity had similar characters in its day. Matt the Jap, great character. Matt the Japanese man, we should say. I don't think we're allowed to say Matt the Jap. Matt the Jap is how everyone knew him in Trinity. He was a similar kind of character who just knocked around the college campus and people kind of looked after him and looked out for him. So, yeah, people in Dublin are very good at that, I think. There's a kind of quiet...
That's mad.
Yeah, there's kind of a thing, you know, where in America, you know, some YouTuber buy a cup of coffee and they'll take a video of themselves doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In Ireland, people just do these kind of quiet little nice acts for the sake of it.
Absolutely.
Speaking of America, Donal, we had the insurrection on Capitol Hill there last week. But I understand that we had an insurrection of our own in 1798.
This was a really like a couple of weeks ago. I sat down and tried to map out the next few weeks of the podcast. Like, what am I going to do to man? And I heard this mad story from a friend of mine years ago about a riot in Dublin in 1757. So a bit 1759. And I should have remembered that, of course, because that is the year in which Guinness was born. I wonder if that was a contributing factor.
Yeah.
But 1759, a rumour swept through the good city of Dublin. In a time before Twitter, rumours could still spread that the Irish Parliament was about to abolish itself, that it was going to vote itself out of existence. Act of Union, bind itself to London, transfer the power it had to London. And they eventually did that, but they did it 40 years later. But this rumour spreads through Dublin like wild, and a crowd of 3,000 people march onto the Parliament, and some of them storm it. And I thought, God, that's a really interesting story. And then it was in the back of my mind, and I was watching the television one day, and they cut from COVID to Capitol Hill. Like, this is absolutely mad. And in some ways, there were there's no great similarities here. I mean, we're talking centuries apart, different countries, different political climates. But just as a curiosity, I thought it was interesting that the two things kind of lined up in my mind. And like in '59, some of the stuff they did is mad. They went into the house and they grabbed one politician and they stripped him of his wig, which to me and you doesn't sound like much, but in like 18th century society, it must be like, oh my God, how dare they? They stripped him of his wig. They put an elderly woman in the seat of the house with a pipe in her mouth, which was like a great insult. A woman smoking, sitting in the throne of the House of Lords, and all this kind of like mocking of the institutions. And actually, for some guys, it was like they pulled one politician up the street, apparently. So, I mean, that wasn't good fun. But most of the day was kind of like insulting the institutions and stuff like that. And then when you looked at Washington, D.C. and people carrying, Nancy Pelosi's podium around in Capitol building and sitting in people's offices with their feet on the tables, reading their emails. Of course, some of it was deadly serious. I mean, 4 or 5 people are dead as a result of it. But it just struck me that there was an interesting historical parallel. So, yeah, I did an episode on that in the aftermath of that. But I was amazed that happened. And, I mean, of all the institutions in all the capitals in the world, it's just, to me, defies logic. You have to think on some level, like, was it the allowed downfall of Trump? Was there any great attempt to stop it from happening? Because it was such a mockery of democracy that they had to move after it against them, and if you wanted to get rid of Trump, if you will, or Trumpism, it's not about getting rid of Trump because Trump is gone, Trump is on the way out, but if you wanted to get rid of Trumpism, which is a much bigger thing, certainly that's the death knell of Trumpism, I think.
Where was the Irish Parliament buildings in 1759 though?
College Green, the Bank of Ireland, now the Bank of Ireland building on College Green, and they marched down 3,000 strong from the Coombe, banging a drum. I love the mental image of them storming the Parliament. It's insane, isn't it?
How old's that building?
1729, so 30 years older than the riot.
Fucking hell.
But the footage in the States was wild because, just the way in which the police panicked, obviously. Yeah. And what did they expect was going to happen? This has been talked of and hashtagged
so bizarre
and built up for so long. I think they were totally caught off guard, and to some extent, without sounding like a crazy conspiracy theorist, because that was a sea of crazy conspiracy theorists. I mean, if you look at some of the placards, it's just absolutely wild, kind of outlandish stuff. But without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, you do wonder to what extent that car crash was allowed to happen. In the belief that it may take the winds out of that movement. Because I felt in the weeks before that, watching the Trump rallies, I mean, Trump was drawing bigger crowds at rallies after losing an election than most people could get to election rallies before elections. People were still donating money to Trump after the election was over, on the basis that they didn't accept the result of it. So, like, Trumpism was something that was going to outlive Trump. I think Trump would have been having rallies right through the Biden presidency that were getting bigger and bigger all the time. And I wouldn't have been surprised if Trump ran again in 2024. He won't.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the aim of this, the impeachment process that we're currently seeing. I think the end game of that is ultimately, like, they know, look, as we're recording this, he's got less than 7 days left in office. Impeaching him is symbolic, but I think their ultimate end game is to avoid him ever holding public office again.
And can they include that in the impeachment?
There'd have to be a separate vote in the Senate, but impeachment is the first step of that process. And I'm not an expert in this, from the bits I've read, and I freely admit to skipping it and going to the cliff notes. But that's my understanding anyway.
What a remarkable operator politically, in the sense that, like, to be a multi-millionaire, I don't think billionaire anymore, claim, but to be a very wealthy man regardless, and to have convinced millions of very poor people across the US that he was their man and had their interests at heart. That says a lot about the failures of the other party as much as anything about him. And absolutely. I noticed today, like on the journal.ie, they've an article on the inauguration of Biden, and it's, I think the title is, celebrity-laden inauguration plan, and all these big names that'll be speaking at it and talking at it. And that's the fatal mistake that they always make, the Democrats, that they, Trump didn't do that kind of thing. He didn't put the focus on these celebrities like me, or, it was very much, they kind of built an insurgency of people who'd been kind of abandoned by politicians in political capacity. Yeah. They didn't even realize that Trump was a politician. They saw him as an insurgent in the White House, but he was a politician at the end of the day. But they never saw him as a politician. They saw him as their man who was taking down the inside from the inside. Unfortunately, they
built a cult of personality around him, like we haven't seen for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even like the way his own family were so highly promoted in every aspect of the administration. Like, no one voted for them. The US presidency, you couldn't name, no one in Ireland could name who had those offices 5 or 6 years ago in most cases, because there's just a massive faceless bureaucracy there. But the way, like, it was almost like royalty, wasn't it? The way they were just all promoted the table. They all had like Trumpism became more than just Donald Trump, and it's very much the son too, that you can see. Even if you look at the website like DonaldTrumpJr.com, they're already kind of building him up to runs. Like, it's like the Irish can't really talk about hereditary politics, because how many people in the Dáil are the grandsons of people that were in the Dáil? Or, we do it too. We do it all the time, actually. TD dies and then their son becomes the TD. Like, this is kind of how we do politics as well. But it was wild to see it on that scale at the very top of the West, in American politics. So
I think
you haven't heard the last of them, but like, maybe you have. Maybe the riot. It wasn't a coup. Like, a coup was there's been American coups. They've just happened in Latin America or in the Middle East. You want to see an American
Colombia,
coup, you want to see
Venezuela.
You want to see a tank pull up outside of Parliament, and you want to see a democratically elected leader shot. That does happen. Just happens in Latin America. It was much less dramatic than a coup, but it was a bloody riot. It was a riot, and it was a significant enough riot. And I think it's really taken the wind out of Trumpism.
From it, we've gained a cult Irish hero, Donny.
Yeah, to go to America and still insist on being called Donny is brilliant. Like those stubborn Gaeilgeoirs who moved to like Berlin and refused to change their name, and you always think, God help the German bureaucrats having to deal with this guy. But Irish people are like that. They'll never concede an inch. They can't pronounce our names at the best of times, but the cling to Donny was brilliant, and he did a great job. And the other thing that should be remembered is one of the cameramen who was inside the Capitol building was from Belfast. He gave an interview to the Belfast Telegraph, which was kind of interesting, and he talked about growing up around Ian Paisley, and growing up around a lot of kind of loyalist street protests and a lot of rioting in the Ulster Says No days, and he kind of drew parallels to what he saw in his youth in Belfast and what it was like to be there. But for a cameraman to go inside the building was really brave, and the fact that there's an Irishman inside getting the video and outside explaining what was happening, it's really, 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 really interesting.
There's a great history between Ireland and America, but there's one of the things we've seen since Joe Biden was named president-elect, a big play on the Irish card again, and we've heard him when he's naming members of his cabinet. He made a little joke about I can't remember the guy's name, but he's from Boston, and he says he's an Irishman. The only problem is he's Galway, not Mayo. Biden, we get the feeling is going to be a friendly ally for Ireland, but there's a great history of people in high office in America being friendly allies to Ireland.
Yeah, and it's a very funny thing. I come into contact with it a lot in normal times, like when I was doing walking tours, that like the number of self-declared Irish Americans is about 35 million, which is extraordinary.
Jesus.
Like there's communities that rival that, like the Germans, for example. They're another massive community in America, and the Italian Americans. But very few of them have to fight for their place in the world in the same way, you know. And if you go to the Tenement Museum in the Lower East Side in New York, really amazing museum, they talk a lot about the unique hardship of the Irish experience in America. That, you know, in some places, like the Irish are involved in very nasty kind of race rioting in New York City, not long after arriving there in the 1850s, 1860s. Like, they're the bottom of the ladder. Like, the reason there's animosity between Irish America and Black America in the 19th century is because they're both on the floor, basically, you know, of the ladder of society. And I think because it was so difficult to be Irish in the States in the 1840s and 50s, that the sense of Irishness, and then of course later on when revolution came in Ireland, like Irish America were the backbone of that in terms of like the Thompson submachine gun.
What changed there then, Donal? What changed the attitudes? In such a small
well, I mean, the attitudes were bad back then. I mean, there was a rabid kind of racism in Irish America, and when Frederick Douglass came to Ireland in the 1840s, the Black Daniel O'Connell, as he called himself, he talked a lot about the hardship, the tension between Irish America and Black America. But the identity, the Irish American identity, is really strong, and it's never really faded. And a place like Woodlawn, like, you're going back, like, for a lot of those people, 5 generations, and they still have this real sense of Irish identity. And I kind of respect that. I think we mock them a bit too much in this country, you know, where I was like, oh, my great grandfather was from Donegal, you know, St. Paddy's Day, all this stuff. But actually, they've done a lot of good too. You know, a lot of the good Irish America has done in terms of the peace process, for one thing, but also investment in Ireland, and all that can sometimes be overlooked. But yeah, it's a strange beast, Irish America, because it ranges from, like, you meet people, for example, in New York City, eastern coast of America, very strong trade union tradition. They'll be very kind of liberal Democrat types, but it can go the whole way across. You know, there is a right wing Irish American bloc, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, kind of like a Catholic Orange Order. You know, there's the whole diversity of views in Irish America. And I think everyone in Ireland, we have one vision of Irish America which doesn't acknowledge how complex they are. Like, America's a continent. Like, we're all closer to Berlin now than a lot of people in America are to each other. You know, we're closer to Paris than people in New York are to the other coast. Probably culturally as much as geographically, if you know what I mean. Like, they're such a broad, massive country, and people don't really take that into account. But yeah, it's a mad thing. And I think Biden, like, the Democrats, have always kept a closer eye on Ireland, and not always in a positive way. Like, Barack Obama called us a tax haven. You know, highlighted the fact a lot of American jobs were being lost to Ireland, and our low corporate tax and companies coming here, and regarded that as a kind of threat to the American economy, and he said it. But then he also came here and, you know, made shook hands and kissed babies too. Like, they understand that if you want the Irish American vote, you still kind of have to come here and do all that. But they have been more hands on. Like, Trump didn't have an ambassador to Ireland for a long time. I think more than a year. We did. That's amazing. Mick Mulvaney, he calls himself. Mick Mulvaney.
Yeah.
The Americans always take Irish names and bastardize them into different things. But Mick Mulvaney, the special envoy to the North, he wasn't in the job long at all. Like, the Trump administration hadn't a clue what was happening in Northern Ireland, even in the time of Brexit. I found that mad. But the Democrats have tended to keep a closer eye on Ireland. I suppose they regard themselves more as the custodians of the peace process and things like that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the years ahead have. I think there will be probably a Biden visit to Ireland at some point, and that'll be a tug of war between, what is it, Carlo or
Louth? Yeah, Carlingford and Mayo.
Donal, this week our news space has been dominated, obviously, by COVID, but obviously, or as well as the mother and baby home report. Historically, I mean, Neil Martin seemed to point fingers at society. One of the issues, he said, was society had as much to blame as the church and as the state. How will all this be remembered in 50, 60 years time? How will his, like, you obviously haven't had time to take in the report as a historian, but how will it all be remembered? Like,
oh, that's a great question. Micheál Martin is actually is a historian, and is quite a good historian. And Micheál has written a couple of books on Cork and the Irish Revolution and Home Rule Party in Cork, Sinn Féin in Cork. So, like, Micheál Martin has a sense of history, and I would say he's a very, very good historian. I enjoyed the book of his that I read. I think he made a good point badly, if that makes sense. I think he was onto something, in the sense that I did a lot of work a couple of years ago on something disconnected and much less serious, but I did an exhibition on censorship in Ireland in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And the impression I had going into that was that this was the story of a tyrannical church, which had forced censorship on the Irish people against our will, like bludgeoned us over the head with the big stick of censorship. So I decided to look at as much, like the BBC did a lot of work on censorship over the years, Irish censorship. So I tried to look at as much of the vox pop and stuff they had done, interviewing Irish people on the streets. I tried to read as many of the newspapers used to do a lot of your views, and they'd stop people on the street and John from Finglas says, and then you'd have a quote from John from Finglas, or Mary from Kildare says, and quote. I tried to do as much of that digging as I could on how people themselves felt. And actually what I found out was that people in Ireland were overwhelmingly pro-censorship. Like Joe Bloggs at the time was a Catholic conservative and believed in that and felt it was necessary. And you had people like 21, 22-year-old young men and women saying, I think there should be more censorship, not less. So it was a different country. And in a sense, I think Micheál Martin was touching on something that is true, that a good chunk of Irish society knew to some extent what was happening in those institutions. Like when you look at the Magdalen laundries and the receipt books for Magdalen laundries in Dublin, they include places like Oris and Uachtaráin, the Guinness Brewery, the colleges. Like everyone was using the Magdalen laundries. People had heard what was occurring in them, but they were still a kind of, accepted might be the wrong word, hushed part of society. People knew they were there and people got on with their lives. And in much the same way, I think my father tells a great anecdote like about going to school in a Catholic school in Ballyfermot in the late 60s, early 70s. And where you had, and this school was quite bad actually when the abuse reports came out, but he said you'd be afraid to go home and say what was happening for fear you'd bring shame on, that you'd be condemned at home for saying it. How dare you say that about the priests? So I think he was onto something, that there was an awareness of the extent of the problem, and there was a blind eye on a societal level that was turned to it. But there's exceptions to the rule. I mean, someone unearthed a brilliant newspaper report in the 30s on Artane and abuse in Artane in the Irish Workers' Voice, which was the newspaper, the Communist Party. How many people read that newspaper? Probably 500 people in addition, and 50 of them were probably guards who had to read it. Society. Yeah. Generally speaking, was not clued in to the realities because they didn't want to be. They knew enough that they could have done more. But I think on a broad level, yes, society did turn a blind eye from all of that. And there's truth in that. He said it in a way that I didn't like, which I think seemed to imply that there was equal blame on society and the institutions. Now, I don't think he meant that. I think it was just in the rush of the moment, it came across that way. All of society shares this blame. But all of society can share the blame in different proportions. The ultimate blame is always going to be on the shoulders of and in the hands of the institutions. And it's remarkable. I mean, the idea of a state so closely aligned to a particular clergy in a republic is remarkable stuff, isn't it? It's just extraordinary what was allowed to happen. I think Noel Brown, the one-time Minister for Health, we could do it Noel Brown now actually, because he was so centrally involved in tackling TB. He wrote a memoir and he has some great anecdotes in it, but one of them that always stuck with me was when the president died, Douglas Tahida, former president, who was Protestant. The funeral was in Patrick's Cathedral, and most of the government ministers wouldn't go in because it was a Protestant cathedral. They just stood outside by their limousines and waited for it to end. And that's remarkable, that kind of mental image for a republic, to be so closely aligned with one church, to such an extent you'd be afraid to walk in the door of another one. I find that absolutely mad.
You're saying there about Micheál Martin being a historian, and that, to be honest, I wasn't aware of that. I thought he was a teacher, but he was obviously a history teacher, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I was watching the press conference yesterday, and it's even more bizarre to me now that he is a historian, in the sense that Aoife Moore asked him, Irish Examiner's Aoife Moore, and friend of our show, asked him in his apology, will he be apologising on behalf of the Fianna Fáil party, who are largely in power throughout all this nasty part of history? And he said he found the question very partisan, and he also said that, you know, a lot of political parties were involved or were around. So he was basically saying Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour Party, Sinn Féin. Now and he was talking about 1922 and onwards, and I found that bizarre in that only a couple of weeks ago he was saying that Sinn Féin was founded in 1970.
Yeah.
But he was shouldering that, you know, Sinn Féin were a part of this as well.
He was kind of one step off saying provisional Sinn Féin a few weeks ago, you know, framing them in terms of
exactly. Do you know what I mean?
But yeah,
it's very revisionist.
That's true. That those parties were, and parties that don't exist anymore were in power too. Clan Republican. There was all kinds of various people in Irish politics that don't exist anymore who would have been in coalition governments at different times. But yeah, certainly blame does go, I think, to the top of politics. Definitely, absolutely. And
what about De Valera's part in giving the keys to the church?
Yeah, I mean, it's De Valera maintains.
Why did he do that, Donal?
There's a beautiful speech from De Valera when Belfast was bombed during the Second World War. De Valera, to his credit, sent Dublin Fire Brigade north, and immediately kind of said, "What can we do?" and did it at a time when there was a lot of tension between the two states, because of course Ireland, Éire, as they called it, was neutral in the war, and Northern Ireland was technically at war. And he gave a great speech at the time, and I saw it actually quoted a little bit in recent weeks on Twitter. But he basically said, you know, we may come from different traditions, and we may have opposing visions of Ireland, but we share this island, and, you know, we hurt in the same way, and we hope in the same way. And I thought it was a great kind of olive branch towards Protestants in 1940s Ireland. And I find it remarkable that someone who would have that understanding of the diversity on the island at the same time, you know, would also be so politically close to the Catholic Church. It struck me as a very, very peculiar relationship between the state and the church in all aspects of life, like in education in particular. There's still a lot of untangling to be done, you know, by historians in explaining the extent of the relationship between church and state in Ireland, which for a republic is absolutely remarkable. Even De Valera's constitution, the line about the church, you know, it basically says that the republic is not tied to any particular religious faith, but that the Catholic Church holds a special place. As good as saying that there is that political relationship between the two. But it's this. I mean, this is going to run and run, I think, and the hero of the story is Corliss, Catherine Corliss, a local historian from outside academia, you know, who took a course in local history and began from there. A self-trained local historian who was, it should be said, in the early stages, knocked back at every step of the way. Her credentials were questioned in the press. You know, who is she? She's not Trinity. She's not UCD. But she dug and she dug and she dug. And it's great, I think, that someone like that from outside the tent of academia is now one of the most respected and most recognised historians in the country. What she did was incredible work.
She lost a lot of friends through it as well. They were like, would you leave it alone and stuff like that, you know? And it's like you're saying that the press and the media were kind of saying, who's this? Sure, wasn't it Terry Prone that said, you won't find any babies in Tuam? Now, obviously, a year or two later, she apologised for those remarks. But she only apologised because pressure was put on her to apologise, and that DNA did find that babies were buried there.
Yeah, and I mean, I spoke on a panel with Catherine Corliss on history and education, and there were a load of school students in the audience. I could tell that they were just so amazed by her. You know, they were moved by what she was saying. I mean, there'll be an uptake in the number of young people who study history because of her. just in the way they always talk about the COVID effects, that like lots of people are going to go on to study medicine and science at third level, which would be great if that is an impact of the crisis. I think she'll inspire a lot of people to maybe keep at it with history. She's a great woman for what she did, and a woman of faith. That's part of the story too. I think that she was doing research where she had questions, right? And the answers, as she discovered them, might not have been the answers that she wanted, but they were still the answers. And
she was honest.
She brought them to the public, and it was difficult. I'm sure it was difficult work to do and challenging work to do. And then I noticed that she turned down the opportunity to meet Pope Francis when he was here. So I mean, that must have been a very difficult decision for her to make. And eventually, she said she'd made a full break with the church, which was her right. I think you'd respect her either way, whatever she decided to do. But I think she went on a journey, a very difficult journey, in doing research like that and discovering difficult things. And historians around the world who write about things like, clerical sex abuse and child abuse and very difficult subjects, I think, because depending on your own background and what you were raised in and what you believe, it must be a very exhausting process to embark on. It's a lot easier to be a socialist historian in Dublin telling happy stories. It's not that I do just that. I've found over the years some things I've researched have been difficult, but I can't imagine the extent of the emotional roller coaster journey that she went on to do all that.
When you're doing your walking tours and tourists, what's the common theme that tourists are here to be interested in history-wise? Is it Guinness? Is it
it's very for a lot of people, there's a very simplistic, massive emphasis on drink. That's kind of what they want to see and what they want to hear. But you also meet a lot of surprising people who have a real curiosity for the country. I mean, one group of people that I was always amazed by were Argentinians. There's like a surprising amount of Irish history in Argentina. In fact, they play hurling in Buenos Aires, and there was a lot of Irish settlement there because it was agricultural, so there was a similar economy to us. It was Catholic, which was another big deal, I think, and the weather was good, which was a enticement too when you came from here. And there was land in abundance. So you do meet. I wouldn't be lying to say over the years I might have met 200 people from Argentina who were born in places like Buenos Aires, had this Irish blood in them, often had bizarre Irish names, and we're here to discover that. So I love when you click with someone like that. Someone who's
that's amazing,
interested in something. There was a real uptake in Black Americans after Obama came here, which was interesting.
Wow.
I'd never really met most of what you met on the tour were like Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, O'Malley's, like deep East Coast Irish Americans. But there was a real uptake in. I would have met quite a lot of kind of Black Americans in the year after Obama came, and I found that really interesting. That they were so taken by the Ireland that they'd seen on television and stuff, and Israelis, which is a curious one. I don't know why that is, but there's a real interest in Ireland and in Israel. And for whatever reason, they come here in a lot of numbers. And that's interesting. That can kind of challenge your own preconceptions, talking to people like that. And Germans, lastly. I think that's a long-standing thing. Irish culture was massive in Germany in the 60s. Like the Dubliners were arguably bigger in Germany than they were in Ireland. Like there was just massive interest in Irish culture. I think because German culture was so toxic after the war, and people didn't want to wrap themselves in a German flag and sing German folk songs, so they got really into Irish culture. And you meet loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of Germans. So it's I kind of miss meeting all these mad people from around the world on tours. But most of it is the kind of Kamali stuff. But when you meet people that want something a bit deeper than that, there's great joy in that, great fun in that. I love doing tours now as well abroad. I miss going. Like I'd always, if I was in a city for the first time, I'd always go on a tour. I think it's a busman's holiday, they call that,
Brilliant.
See how he's doing it. Rob some jokes, there's no tourists really in Dublin now at the moment. And you get a real sense walking through town that's a problem. It's not a problem that there's no tourists. It's a problem that the city is now basically designed for tourism.
Yeah.
Very, very few people live in the city anymore. Like you walk into town now and it's within my 5 km, so no one report me to Neffet, please. But you walk into town and there's no one around. There's very few communities left in the city, less and less public housing even all the time. And I think that's that's a real tragedy, compared to other cities in Europe where people live over shops and, they use space better than we do. I don't think anyone lives. In fact, I know for a fact now, no one lives on Stephen's Green. No one lives on Grafton Street. No one lives on O'Connell Street, which is kind of strange. There's no other city, capital city, where that would be the case. And when they allowed construction to go back, and they said, we're prioritising the construction of housing and the construction of dwellings, most of the construction that's happening in Dublin now is for tourists. It's apart hotels, student accommodation, all that kind of student accommodation, which will eventually be turned into apart hotels, when there's no demand for it. So, I think we need to reconfigure the city a little bit in terms of who we build for and what we build. And I wish there was just more and more people in the city, and there are very few playgrounds in the city centre, very few schools. Yeah. And Dublin feels like a ghost town in the way that a lot of capital cities don't at the minute.
Yeah. Donald, 2021 is supposed to be a census year, but it's been postponed to 2022. I'm curious because as a social historian as such, recording where you were on census night, all that kind of stuff, there has to have been some doozies you've come across over the years.
I love the census. I mean, the census, we've two full censuses online in 1901, 1911. They're great. And there was a lot of pressure to get the first one from the 20s on. It hasn't happened yet, but it will eventually happen. Katrina Crowe, who used to run the National Archives, is a real champion of the census, and she's trying to get the one from, I think it might be 26. I think it's 26 up online. But I've gone through the 1901, 1911 censuses, and there's just great stuff in them. I mean, Sean McDermott, who died after the Rising, one of the signatories of the proclamation, his 1911 census return. I'm always meaning to print it out actually and put it on the wall. It's really funny. He lists his religion as Irish nationalist and his marital status as single but not for long. Which and there's all kinds of there's another Tatters the dog is in the 1911 census somewhere.
Yeah,
and I think he's listed as Catholic and unable to read and write, which is great. Or maybe it's that he speaks only Irish. But there's a couple of dogs in the people put their pets down in the census. And then there's other things that are like, there's people that are missing. So like women didn't have the right to vote yet. So in 1911, a lot of the suffragettes across Britain and Ireland, they said, well, if we're invisible, if the state won't recognise us and give us the right to vote, if we don't exist, we shouldn't be in the census. And lots of those women hid on census night in different places. So there's very famous kind of early 20th century Irish women, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, for one. And they're just not in the census because as an act of protest, they disappeared that night. So there's all these mad things in the census that you can find. Like one of the other lads when I was on the Come Here To Me blog, one of the other lads went through the census and he found atheists and agnostics in the 1911 census. Like, imagine describing yourself as an atheist in Ireland in 1911. People must have thought you were mad.
Yeah.
Two young ones, two sisters living in Ranelagh, list their religion as suffragettes. So like you had all this kind of stuff going on. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's enough wits in Ireland now that you might get some funny answers next year on the census that they'll find in a century. But they're a really brilliant source of information, and for all kinds of different reasons. And they're kind of emotional too. Like if you can go back into your family history to even see the handwriting of your great grandfather or whatever, your great grandfather is a very powerful thing. It brings them that little bit closer to you. And I love the census. You can get lost in it forever. And it's free. Like the 1901 and 1911 census are both online for free. If your house is old enough, you can see who was living in your house 100 years ago, which is mad. Like a friend of mine discovered that her apartment down on Bagot Street, Thomas McDonough, one of the leaders of the Rising, had lived in it.
Wow. So, no way.
Like would you not be like, wow, that's insane? If you discovered a history like that to your house.
That's nuts, yeah.
So it's great. Now, most of us live in houses that were built in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, so you're not going to find it, never mind find someone interested in it. But for people who live in parts of Dublin, like Stony Batter, you have one or two friends there, you can see who was living in the houses. They're artisan dwelling company houses. There were workers from Guinness or from Jemison, and there they are, and there's their names. I think it really brings your house to life as much as anything else. So yeah, you can get lost in it, and it'd be great fun in 100 years when they go through ours and see ours.
Well, are they planning on putting any more years up online?
I think 26 is the first one post independence, and I'm open to correction on that. But there has been talk of that going online for a long time now, and it hasn't happened. I think one reason that would be a really interesting census is it's post revolution. You know, it's 4 years into the birth of the state, and it'd be interesting to see. You know, people always talk about the lads who lost the Civil War, the Republicans. Lots of them couldn't get work here, that they emigrated, that they kind of pop up in the four corners of the earth, that there were more IRA men in Camden Town than there were in Dublin. It'd be interesting to see that kind of stuff. You know, you'd see the impact of a post-revolutionary society. You know, who the losers, you know, who was left, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great, and eventually that'll be the next one up online from the 20s to dig into. But I think it says a lot about us that they got that up online and accessible and free. I think that's really something to celebrate. You know?
Absolutely. And then
people list their religion as Klingon and stuff now. You know, people just mess with it. But.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. A load of jokers we have. This year, then, in terms of you mentioned earlier on, and I'm conscious we're tight on time, but you mentioned earlier on about the decade of centenaries. This year, of course, marks a pretty big one in the signing of the treaty. Hopefully they get to do something to mark it, although I'm not sure what they can do.
You know what I'd love them to do?
You know?
The treaty debates happened in Earlsfort Terrace, in what's now the National Concert Hall. It was a big one because, like, throughout the War of Independence, the Dáil was like an illegal parliament, so it was kind of underground, and they couldn't really, like, they had the big meetings in the Mansion House at the start, but you know, within a couple of months, the Dáil was illegal, so they weren't able to really meet in public. You know, they met in secret places, mostly in the kind of suburbs like Dublin 6, Dublin 4, but then when they're having the treaty debates, they're able to be out in the open, and they have them in the concert hall, Earlsfort Terrace, what was then the college, and they're all there. And there's great pictures of them all walking in, you know, Collins, Griffith, Liam Mellows, Markovich in their finest. And it'd be great to reenact those, you know, to get actors to go to Earlsfort Terrace, the concert hall now. I know it looks totally different, but get around that and just act out the speeches. It'd be great. And of course, you can do it socially distanced. If we're still socially
that's
distanced,
true.
Here. But the speeches are really vicious. Like Markovich is talking, and someone, I think it's Collins, shouts like, you know, "You're a damn English woman." So, someone else's Markovich denounces divorce in her speech, which was kind of mad. Which is like there'd be English immorality like divorce if this thing passes, but just mad tension in the room, and you know, people mocking each other and shouting at each other. And Patrick Pearse's mother was there, and she said something like, you know, "My son didn't die for this mockery of a treaty," and the place erupted. So it'd be great to see the carnage of the treaty debates reenacted by actors. And there's people that can do it in new productions. Brilliant. I don't know if you've ever seen their stuff. There's site-specific actors, so they go to the places where history happened and they kind of reenact it.
Yeah.
And during the Rising Centenary, they did some mad stuff where, like, you'd meet an actor and he'd be like, "Follow me," and he'd be going down the back lanes of Moore Street, and they'd be having shootouts. Brilliant. They're the kind of guys in new productions, the kind of guys and girls who could bring the treaty debates to life in a big way. But the problem with the treaty is that the obsession now for a century has been on Collins and Dev, and are you a Collins man or are you a Dev man? I'd like to see just a broader view of the treaty, you know, and especially most people in Ireland don't know anything about the British side of the debate.
Yeah,
you know, people like Lord Birkenhead and Hammer Greenwood and Churchill. I mean, these were rampant, unapologetic imperialists, nasty political operators, you know. And ultimately, I think the blame for partition in Ireland, it's not on the shoulders of Collins or Dev. You know, it rests in London, and we don't know much about those people. And the point that the president made a couple of years ago in a speech, it was very true. He said, "Look, we spend a lot of time in this country talking about was it right or wrong to have a revolution, but we never really talk about colonialism or imperialism or the British side of things." And to put a spotlight on Britain's role in the treaty would be interesting, you know, because they were not going to lose. They were adamant that if they conceded here, if they lost in Ireland, the whole thing was like Jenga, you know, just go. India would fall, Egypt would fall, South Africa would fall. I think that was Ireland's misfortune, that we may have left the empire a little bit too early, you know, that we were never going to get the full shilling.
Yeah.
Wow.
I presume Three Castles Burning will have some great stuff on it.
Yeah, I mean, the next few I'm getting away from the revolutionary period because I think I've done a lot on it. The next one is on the Monto, Take Her Up the Monto.
Ah, yeah.
Amazing story, Monto, where it came from, where it went. After that, I'm planning to do one on the nightclubs of Dublin in the 70s and 80s. The beginning of kind of dance music in Dublin. So to make the aim is that the shows are all so different that someone might tune in one week and say, I don't really care about this subject. I don't care about League of Ireland football. I don't care about 1920. But they'll come back next week and go, I kind of do care about this, and they'll give it a listen then. So yeah, by later in the year, I'll probably be really back into the revolutionary period. But I'm giving people a break from the decade of centenaries for just a little bit.
Will we get more of the bold lass Fallon on the podcast? Don?
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah,
He's
so
great.
yeah,
He's been on I think 4 times, and
cult hero.
no one had actually done that work before. Like, no one had really studied fire in the revolution. Like, when you think about it, if you're having a revolution, or if you're putting down a revolution from the British point of view, there's always going to be fire. You know, there's arson, there's like the burning of Cork, the burning of Balbriggan, and he really made that his thing, that he studied the impact that fire had on the revolution. And he just found a little niche, and he went with it.
Yeah.
So I had him on a few times. One show was about looters, the looters in 1916.
Yeah, that was a brilliant episode.
They were
brilliant.
burning stuff like on the first day of the Rising, before the British gunboat, the Helga, even arrived. Like, Dublin was burning on the first day of the Rising because people were looting, and then this still happens. Like, if you look at footage of the Rodney King riots, or even the riots in recent months in the States, when you loot something, you set it on fire because you think you're burning the evidence. Do you know what I mean? So you move on then. And that was true in 1916 as well, that people were emptying shops and then setting them on fire. And Laz kind of proved that actually this urban myth that the British gunboat, the Helga, came in and rained incendiary shells on Dublin and the place went up. He kind of busted that Dublin was burning on the first night of the Rising before that ship had even shown up. So we did it ourselves.
Yeah.
And I was going to tell you, one of my favourite Three Castles Burn episode, and since the pandemic we've been lucky to get them weekly almost. But the Willie Birmingham episode just...
Oh, it's great.
Brilliant episode.
I just
really
adored
resonate with people, and I did that with his son, and we did it in Tara Street Fire Station, and the idea of doing that now, I mean, you couldn't, because the lads are so busy. They run the ambulance service as well as the fire engines, so they're COVID frontline workers now. It's funny how quick things change like that, you know. Is
there any TV documentaries on Willie Birmingham, though?
There should be, and there's so much archive on them that could be done. You know, the work could be done very easily, because the main thing you need, if you want to make, there's great ideas for documentaries and all kinds of things, but if you don't have the archive, if the video doesn't exist, if the audio doesn't exist, then sorry, you can't do it.
Very hard.
But there's so much great footage of Willie Birmingham that it would be, it'd be a relatively easy job for someone if they take it on, and I hope someone does. I think it would really resonate with the public in a big way. People love those kind of heroic stories, don't they?
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's made for the screen.
I think
very
that
funny
point.
Man too, you know, very funny man in his own way. And I like that his funeral happened in Patrick's Cathedral, despite the fact he was Catholic. He became so close to the reverend up there, who actually let the homeless people have free funerals in the cathedral, which was brilliant.
Yeah,
they kind of became friends, and there's great footage of his coffin going to Patrick's Cathedral. I just think there's so many layers to the story that it would be great TV for someone to take on.
I think that the point around archive audio and archive footage was a great recent example of that was the Johnny Cash documentary.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, those tapes, they just took that fantastic tape of that gig and ran with it.
Yeah.
They made it work by pulling in more stuff. You know, most of the audio most of the archive was Cash in America and stuff.
Yeah.
But they had enough Irish stuff to make it work. And I thought that was a great piece of TV. It was really good. Television was fantastic over Christmas.
Yeah.
You know, it was really, really good. I remember thinking, God, I should stay in more and watch TV. It's always this good. But the Johnny Cash documentary was great. Absolutely great. My mum went to see The Highwaymen, which was like the country super group. So like the NWA of country music. You know, there were all the best country stars in one group. Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson, and Johnny Cash. Yeah. And she always says, even at that point in life when he was getting on, you know, that he still had it.
Yeah.
Women still loved him and men wanted to be him. But I thought I wasn't aware of the extent of Cash's affection for Ireland, and I thought it was a lovely piece of work. I like seeing super fans interviewed and things.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I am one of those kind of super fans with the Smiths, and it's a bit weird, the level of obsession people develop with bands. But to see these lads in, I think one guy was in the Liberties and I think the other guy was down the country somewhere, but to see their Johnny Cash collections and how excited they still were, I just thought it was really beautiful. It was just great TV.
It really was.
Feel good.
Donald, thanks so much.
Yeah, I was going to ask one more before we go, because I figure we've already run over, so sure, what's a few minutes more?
In for a penny, for a pound, is that what they say?
That's it, Donald, that's it. But just when you were talking, you mentioned two things you've said kind of spored it into my head. It wasn't something that I was going to ask about earlier, it just literally dawned on me as you were saying two things there. Earlier on you said about kind of the pandemic and 2020 being a great year then for Irish podcasts in the sense of it gave birth to some unbelievable productions. And then when you referenced kind of Fire and one thing and the other, it dawned on me the Stardust podcast that was produced by the Journal last year. And of course we're getting to that time of year where the Harrowing stories always come out a little bit more and one thing and the other. Will you be doing something on it? Will you?
You know what? It's happened to me twice that I had an idea for something and then it was done by people with a much bigger budget, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
in the sense that my budget, as I said, it's a Zoom recorder, but they did such an immaculate job on it. The Journal.ie team, that I think there's nothing to do. You know what I mean? In the sense they really captured it so well. The Stardust story that I have is that my dad was in the brigade in the late 80s, and he wasn't long in the fire brigade when the big strike happened in 1988. And the firemen were really vilified. Like, there was nasty stuff. I think the Evening Herald front page was "People will die." It was like, these guys are on strike and people will die. And one day the Stardust families came down because one of the newspapers said something like, there could be another Stardust, and if there is another Stardust, they take the blame for it. And the Stardust families went, this isn't right. These guys did everything they could for our loved ones. And they came down to one of the picket lines. And people who'd been burnt in the fire, people who were badly hurt, came down and stood with the fire brigade. I just think that was really, really just a powerful moment of kind of
absolutely
working class decency, common ground. So that was, I think the Journal did that so well that I was just like, right, that's done now. And fair play to them for doing it. And they picked up a lot of praise that it rightly deserved and won a lot of awards. The other one was a much lighter story. I wanted to do something on we started on football, so we'll end on football. The Wimbledon thing, when they're talking about bringing Wimbledon Football Club to Dublin, and there was all these great banners, Wimbledon for tennis, Dublin for football, and the Wimbledon fans were against it, like the real Wimbledon fans who became MK Dons, so the good guys in the story, and not MK Dons, they're the bad guys in the story. AFC Wimbledon. Sorry, fuck MK Dons. I want that on record. They're the bad guys. AFC Wimbledon are the football people. But the Wimbledon fans had banners, Dublin equals death, and they didn't mean like damn Dublin. They meant if we go there, our club dies. And I did a bit of research on that story with a podcast in mind. But then one day, Off the Ball did a feature on it, like an hour and a half feature, because there was nothing for them to do. You know what I mean? There was no sports to cover. So Off the Ball, we're doing great historical stuff. They Paul Rouse on talking about the history of GAA, and then one day they did this mammoth documentary on Wimbledon, and I just went, fuck it, they've done it, it's been done.
Were you any of Paul's classes when you were in UCD?
Yeah, and not only was I had a really nice gig a couple of summers ago bringing American students around Ireland and basically pointing at the Cliffs of Moher and pointing at UVF murals in Belfast. But one of the things they got was they were taken to UCD and Paul Rouse gave them like a crash course history of Ireland. And he just did it in a way I've never seen. He's just a brilliant communicator. I think he's one of the best. And like, he was managing a Gaelic team, writing the newspaper column, teaching, writing books. He's just really prolific. He was in the Bloody Sunday documentary, of course, and he's always popping up in different places. I'm a big fan of Paul Rouse. I must get him on the podcast.
I was just thinking the same thing when you said his name. It was somebody who I thought of a long time ago, and his name just vanished into obscurity for me until you said it. I was like, Paul, he was one of the fucking best lecturers I had. Just everything he talked about, you were on the edge of your seat listening to him. Like,
yeah, and he doesn't really use a lot of print. You notice that he just kind of goes with it, and I love the confidence of someone that can just get up and they have their slides, but a lot of what they're saying is kind of coming off the top of their heads, and
Yeah.
the knowledge is strong enough that they can do it. And he's a really great performer. Yeah, he's a really great performer.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Wimbledon. So News Talk bet me off the ball, bet me to Wimbledon, and the Journal did such a great job with the Stardust series that I hope actually that they'll follow it up. It'd be great if they came back in a year and did some follow up interviews, because there's talk now around the new inquiry. But yeah, fair play to them. That was journalism at its best.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Donal, absolute pleasure as always. And there is a raft of things we could and we will talk to you about another day. But we've taken up far too much of a Wednesday evening for you as it is.
No, it was great. It was really nice. And you don't see many people anymore these days.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Even if it's on a screen, it's nice,
Next time we do
you feel like the people in Super Value are your friends now. Because
yeah.
the only face you see all the
I just went to Dunn's today to get out of the house. Come here, Donal. You over the last year as well, like, obviously, I want you to tell the listeners how they can find Three Castles Burning, but also you've been selling a lot of merchandise as well for a couple of charities, which I've the proud owner of a couple of badges and a couple of T-shirts. Is there any more plans for more merchandise down the road?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with Level 5 is that the producers have kind of shut down.
Yeah.
But it's nice. I've always had an obsession with ephemera, so badges, stickers, posters, all that kind of stuff, and bootlegging. I love bootleg culture. I love how like during Italia 90 and USA 94 there were T-shirts on O'Connell Bridge the next morning referencing the events of the game yesterday. And I was like, how did that happen? Like how did the Ray Houghton T-shirt make its way from an idea to a reality in like a day? So I got really into this kind of culture, and we did one when Jack Charlton died of the Italian 90. Remember Chow?
Yeah.
The Italian
I bought
90
it,
mascot.
I have it.
Yeah, we put him in. We changed the color of the tricolour from green, white, and red to green, white, and orange, and it said, thank you for the days, Jack Charlton. And we raised about I think €1,500 for Alzheimer's Ireland, but I got a cease and desist from FIFA.
Wow.
Yeah, someone obviously reported it, and FIFA said, "Oh, we own the copyright to Chow. Please remove this from your shop immediately." So I took it down in the end, but the money was already made, so it didn't really matter. But I just love the buzz of it, and some of the stuff has been kind of funny, like the 1988 logo. Like that's classic. The three castles stacked on top of each other, yellow, blue, red. No one knows who owns it. I just think it was so classic. I brought it back. I think money on that went to Harold's Cross Hospice. So it's been kind of fun. And I got to develop a kind of, a relationship with the printing company down in East Wall. And I enjoy making the stuff. I get a buzz off the stuff and seeing the stuff. And as I said, it's raised a few quid for good causes as we've gone. So it's been great crack.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I love when the box of T-shirts arrives and they're still warm,
Absolutely. How can people listen to Three Castles Burning?
It's everywhere. Like yourselves on Spotify, iTunes. Unlike Donald Trump, I'm still on Twitter. Three Castles with the number 3. Three Castles Burning. Just started one there. Very artistically, it's only going to follow one page. It only follows Grogan's. It doesn't even follow me.
Brilliant. Don't follow anyone else.
Grogan's will be. I think Grogan's will be a year close. That was my nightmare vision, that they'd make it a full year cycle. And you know what? It's starting to look likely that it might be.
Yeah.
So it's the only page I follow is Grogan's for those terrible, terrible memes that they produce.
Danny, where can we listen to us?
In all the places that Donal has just referenced, when you're done listening and binge listening,
but sure, they know where to listen to you because they're listening now.
That's very true.
But there's always a couple of stragglers you have to pick up, and then once we do this bit first today, when we plug Manscaped, we don't seem like shields, So you can get us everywhere and anywhere. And look, lads, January doesn't have to be blue, and you don't have to have blue balls. You can go to manscaped.com and enter the code WTSPod, and you'll get 20% off and free shipping. So you can look after yourself and your lads below the belt. And if you get the weed whacker, me and Miro have talked plenty of times in this podcast about there being a lack of a reliable nose hair trimmer. Well, the weed whacker puts that to bed. I am inhaling things up my nose at the moment. I had 2 cornflakes fly up there the other day when I used the weed whacker. So check it out, manscaped.com, WTS pod, get 20% off. free shipping.
He's at Danjo Murray on Twitter. I'm at Merrigamania. And until next time, clear eyes,
full hearts.
At Lewis. Thanks so much, Donal.
Thank you, Donal.
Sangafall.